stark and harrowing account of the evil that's out there. I listened to this talk last year and sat there at the front today. Some of the accounts, I don't want to hear that again. And I think you guys must have felt the same. Some things we just cannot comprehend. Just to point out, one of the final slides Aaron had is give in to the inspiration. So I was sat there last year and I thought, who are these people? Who is aerial recovery? And I went and did their training, and they're a good bunch. So certainly something to look into. Moving on, next we have Luca Alfati and Mark Hannaford, two good friends of mine. I'll put that in there. They'll be talking about some of the team who have been involved in Medics4Ukraine, which was a charity that was set up at the start of the Ukraine war to provide medical aid and subsequently tactical medical training to the armed forces of Ukraine. Luca is an advanced paramedic and seasoned expedition leader. He is also the head of operations for Medics4Ukraine and has led several trauma medical training courses to frontline Ukrainian special forces, soldiers and medics. Mark, well, we all know Mark, and if I listed everything he's done, I would need another talk in itself. So instead, Mark, I'd like to thank you for everything you've done for WEM, for us, and for this beautiful thing you've created. You've saved careers, and now you've been saving lives through Medics4Ukraine. Medics4Ukraine have now raised about almost £3 million in medical aid, which has been delivered to the front line. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mark, Luca, and the team to the stage.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you very much. So, we did a presentation on Medics4Ukraine and kind of the initial stages last year. So what we're not going to do is repeat that this year. And thank you so much for your presentation. That was incredibly moving and educational. And I think it highlights the fact that kind of what we said at the beginning, actually, the individual action of individual people can change stuff. I think the problem seems so insurmountable. It's like, well, that's that agency's responsibility. That's the sort of law enforcement. We in this room are part of the solution. Individually, we can make a massive difference. So what we're going to do today is Luca and I are just going to kind of talk about where we are with Medics4Ukraine, sort of a year and a half, I don't know how long, down the road, and then hand over to some of the guys that have been working for us, but other organizations in Ukraine as well, so that it can kind of illustrate to those of you that might be moved to respond in this way what the reality is like and what it's like on the ground, and strip away some of the what might seem like the glamour stuff and expose some of the reality and the difficulty, the challenges, but also the rewards as well. So we were moved to act. And we have responded, we're a training and educational organization and trying to build communities and make links and share information and experiences. But we've also responded on occasions where we're able to and where logistically it's possible for us to do so. And many years ago, we assisted delivering a pediatric mobile hospital to the border of Syria when the last pediatric hospital in Aleppo was bombed out. And I used to live and work in Syria a long time before the conflict, and at that time it was the friendliest country I'd ever worked and lived in, and dramatically changed by conflict. And also when the Myanmar coup happened, we were able to do online Burmese language sessions for the medical community there, because they were so unused to dealing with trauma and the sort of output of conflict. With Ukraine, to be honest, it was a country where we didn't have contacts with and had, to be quite honest, very little knowledge of Ukraine as a country. But when the invasion started, it felt that we simply couldn't sit still and not respond in some way. Politics aside, we just felt we needed to respond and support the medical community there to the overwhelming change in circumstances and what they were going through. So I put a message out on our sort of internal WhatsApp group about we should do something, let's do something. And then I disappeared to Mauritania, completely off comms for 2 weeks. But in the meantime, Luca had responded, and if you've had a brief exposure to Luca, he's like an endless sort of Duracell, I could say battery. His energy is constant. And I'm going to get him to sort of pick up the story, just to illustrate, not to grandiose what we do, or to, it's to illustrate what you can do and the steps that those insurmountable problems that you just start breaking down and chipping away and making them small problems and just tackle one after the other. And sort of going back to that Nelson Mandela quote, everything seems impossible until it's done. And we're certainly not done in Ukraine and the way that we might respond. But how those steps as a sort of non-responding organization, how we built up a really quite robust network to the point where we were delivering more, and this seems incredible, more than the British government were delivering to Ukraine, which seems ridiculous, to be quite frank, that us were doing that, and it should have, you do think it should be the responsibility of bigger organizations. But Luca, do you want to pick up the story in terms of how we originally got going?
I'll do it from here. Thanks for the rabbit quote. So yeah, basically, this is especially initially, so it's quite a quote to say we were delivering more than the British government. We basically started very quickly, very early, to get involved with Ukraine, but as Mark was saying, we had no contacts. So it was more the power of believing people, but also doing your homework on their background that started the whole of Medics4Ukraine. And there's a quote that I always use when I do stuff like this, which is like, I don't see normally problems, I see solutions. And it's very, very true. When you have a big problem, you try to break it down in chunks, and you try to solve or find a solution for each chunk of that. So we needed someone trustworthy. So that was my very first step. I need to find someone in country that knows what's going on, that's got the right background, and I can trust. And all I did, I answered a call on LinkedIn from a Polish person, Lucas. And I don't think he's connected today, but if you are, thank you very much. By doing that, doing my background checks and so on and so forth, I knew that this person was trustworthy and he was trying to help. And basically put us in touch with Stefan. So this Medics4Ukraine is not just me and Mark, it's a huge amount of volunteers, and I've got 2 here today that are going to talk to you, and I'm going to give their experience in a minute. But Stefan is a key part of the operation, and he's a Ukrainian from Kherson. None of what we have done would have been able to do without the help of Stefan. And basically by just bit by bit, breaking down the small manageable problems, we basically managed to get out there within like 3 weeks. And whilst there were like big warehouses in Poland full of medical aid that were not able to get in because of red tape, I think you mentioned it before, Aaron, there was like something similar in your talk as well. Within a couple of weeks, we had actually medical equipment in Kherson, whilst it was actually encircled, in Bakhmut, and in quite a few other places around the country. And that was because we used the locals to help us. I've noticed quite often, as a Western organizations, we try to go into places just try, and I don't know if it sounds bad, but try to tell people what to do, and I completely disagree with the approach. It's more like, I'm here, we are here, we can do this for you, how do you want to use us? And it's been a very effective way to basically get within the skin of the situation and deliver what we needed to deliver, which initially was medical equipment. So mainly trauma. We actually started with the idea of trying to replicate what WEM did for Syria. So we wanted to focus on pediatric support. If you remember, the big pediatric hospital in Kiev was bombarded very, very early on in the war. But very quickly we realized that actually it was full-on scale, the whole country is at war, and they needed just trauma medical kit of whatever sort we could actually get. So we kept going, so without going back to what we said last year, but we keep sending convoys. One has crossed the border yesterday. with about £150,000 worth of trauma medical equipment. We worked with Celox from a hemostatic perspective, so we've got 5,000 units of Celox Rapid that is going to be in front line in the next couple of days. Tourniquets, IFACs, whatever is needed, we try to provide. And that is what mainly we were doing last year, but in the meantime, we actually scaled up our training program. So by going over what we very quickly understood as Ukraine didn't really have a pre-hospital program. Very well-trained doctors, nurses, but no in the pre-hospital arena, if you want. So we were asked, great, you're giving us all this stuff. How do we use it properly? And that's where we thought we could offer help, especially from a WEM perspective. Most of us are faculty, most of us have got the experience in the pre-hospital setting, humanitarian, expedition, and so on. And it was like, how do we do this safely? So Mark and I went out several times just trying to work out what was the best way of doing it. We talked to Special Forces medical, at the Special Forces medical headquarters, various politicians as well, and other organizations. But we found that the best approach was actually to speak to the units directly because of the communication. We were just getting very mixed messages in between who's running the show and what is actually happening at ground level. So we keep working directly with in the various areas with the units, with hospitals, with clinics. We did training for emergency services, firefighters, whoever basically needs it, we just deliver it. And going back to having a good support network at home, I've been told I was doing too much. It was really affecting my family life. I was on the phone every night. We went to Ukraine 6-7 times in the space of like a couple of months. I wasn't able to think straight. It was all about, that's all I'm doing. I was doing my 12-hour shifts at the ambulance. I wasn't, performing well. I was just taking over my life. And that's where I realized that we needed to really start getting other people on board. So we got a good network of volunteers now that are sent every month, whenever a request comes in different areas of Ukraine to do training. And that's why these guys are here, which I'm going to introduce right now. We had obviously problems to overcome, but there are only solutions, no problem. One of the team was not able to go out just a few days earlier for a training that we had planned in Kiev, I think it was. And through our network, we found out that there were two really cool paramedics. They were already doing some great work for other organizations who stepped up and said, yes, I think we can help. And so I'm just going to introduce you to David and Sean, and they are the ones that actually are going to do a presentation for you today. So it's how it is to do work out there in a war zone, what are the challenges, and how you overcome those challenges, and what else they have done whilst they were out there. Thank you, guys. Go on.
So just a quick primer on this is we're going to kind of blast through a bunch of photos and stuff because I think audience participation is way more interesting. But due to security concerns, we might be very vague about certain things, and that is not at all to kind of create an atmosphere of intrigue or not wanting to share knowledge. It's because there are active security concerns for people that both Sean and I work with, and so just kind of really appreciate you guys understanding we might be vague about some things. Other things is that you'll see some photos of us doing work outside with other organizations. And so you might see us in different kit. And then when we're working with Medics4Ukraine, we have that very, very well labeled. So with that, I'm David, and this is Sean.
Good morning. So I'm Sean. I'm a critical care paramedic from the United States. And basically the last 4 years of my life have been associated with Ukraine in some fashion, previously working there for a diplomatic organization, basically up until the war broke out. And that's actually where David and I met, was in the Donbass. And it was interesting because we had never met previously, despite doing previous humanitarian and disaster medicine around the world and working with all the same people. And actually had no idea who each other were until we crossed paths. And then we crossed paths again when the war broke out, as many of the people who were on the medical team for that mission felt very obligated to return to Ukraine despite being told by our countries that we were to leave, as we had many colleagues that didn't have the privilege of being able to cross the border and were potentially even at the early stages of the war facing being drafted due to the quite literal existential threat that the country was facing. So.
And we haven't really been able to get rid of each other since. Both of us work for another special rescue group in the United States. This is us during some training, yeah, we've spent a lot of time together. At one point in time around June, we realized that we had spent the vast majority of the year up to that point already with each other.
Your dog was missing you pretty severely.
My dog was really missing me. You know, but last year we were working in Ukraine. And afterwards, we were pretty happy with what we had done, and we were like, yeah, we're good. We're not going to go back. And so, of course, we ended up back there this year.
It's just an interesting note on that, since it's a joke, but a lot of humanitarian aid survives through the nonprofit sector. This is not something that you get into for the money. It's actually a great way to expend any finances you may have managed to save up over the course of the year. And particularly to Ukraine, there's a lot of different projects going on with connections, and they want to be able to follow through with continuing their mission for various hospitals, organizations, children who need winter clothing, elderly people who need shelter and food. And they're truly surviving off donations and press, or just the goodwill of volunteers being able to give a little bit extra, being able to just pay for their own plane ticket to get in country. Or in many cases, it's simply easier for us to bring in kit with us as we cross the border, you know, as many duffel bags as we can. So.
Sean usually gets to work in really nice places. And I usually end up in the back of vans. Don't ask me how that happens. It usually is more comfortable. But, you know, while we're over there, you know, we treat a wide variety, whether it be military, whether it be civilian, in this case.
In this case, a dog.
Canines.
Yeah.
And we're doing so very low resource. This is a pretty good example of one of the evacuation platforms that we would be using. And as you can see, it's a little tight. It's not too bad. It's about what you would get for a kind of a flight roll. But
and some organizations and some projects, we didn't have the luxury of stretchers that would lock in. I saw other teams repurposed ambulances that were out of service from the London Ambulance Service, repainted and refitted to go to the front line, or working with organizations doing the interfacility transfer route from one city to another. But yeah, there was definitely a time, particularly last year, where they were taking any type of vehicle they could get to help evacuate the wounded, the injured, and just supplement their system, because as was mentioned, their pre-hospital care network is in development. Their first class of what we would consider paramedics here, the 4-year degree paramedics, just graduated in January of last year. So that introduction to EMS was very, very new, and crossing that cultural and professional barrier, introducing ourselves as paramedics and nurses from other countries was a very awesome opportunity to share lessons that we can bring to them and help integrate and supplement their system. And over the last year, seeing how they've taken advantage of that.
We do have some kind of fun photos. This was actually taken at a sunrise. We had a missile attack just before sunrise. I will fully admit that Sean and I were both cranky, and so instead of going into the bunker, we actually went outside to some park benches. You can see the pillow that we brought with us along with our kit, and because we were adamant that we were going to get the sunrise. That didn't happen too many times, thankfully. Now this is us working with various students. The next few photos are kind of all of this. I will say that working with these students was really phenomenal. They are so hungry for information, and when you give it to them, especially you know, this really high fidelity training, you see immediate. It's just immediate. They immediately get it. You know, there's no issues of kind of retention. There's no issues of you know, not kind of being up to what we would consider to be more of like a Western standard. Mostly they just don't have the supplies. But as soon as you give it to them, it's immediate. So, ultrasound, that's a day. And then they're using it. And they're using it effectively and immediately. We did a mix of trainers, civilians, military medics, they're pre-hospital, along with several soft teams.
I would also add, it's quite important to realize actually when you say military medics training and so on, they don't necessarily have actually a background in paramedicine or nursing. It's a country of war. Everyone is constricted, which we could have an argument about, like working as a charity, saying, oh, you're being political because you are actually training military. Is effectively, that's not what we're doing. We're training some military, but the majority of these people, up until 2 years ago, they weren't in the army. They literally got given uniforms, like, right, now you are a soldier, and you know what, by the way, you're going to be the medic.
Yeah. One of the things to emphasize about that is the Ministry of Health falls under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Defense due to martial law. If you are a Ukrainian healthcare provider, you can potentially be given a uniform at any point and sent from your hospital in Lviv down to Kherson, or taken your ambulance from Kiev and sent over towards Kharkiv, wherever that front may be, wherever they need those resources. That is the reality of the situation, is that in this photo we have people who are anesthesiologists that were not prior military until the war broke out because they needed resuscitationists at the front line. There are pre-hospital physicians who at any point in the cities that they work at in the rear, safer areas may be facing with an MCI from a missile attack. There are police officers who are simply desiring more training because they don't know what to expect. There's their equivalent of instructors that are curious of what do these Western countries bring with TCCC or DHA or NATO? What are they teaching us, and how can we incorporate that into our curriculums? So there's an entire gamut and spectrum of students, and it was also really incredible for some of these students who had experience on the battlefield to come into our classroom and take a leadership role as well, and allow us to give them the opportunity to train their fellow countrymen and women, and really help emphasize that this is going to save lives and this is needed. And just can't emphasize enough how much these students were some of the best you could ask for, because they, as an instructor, if we were to demonstrate just a simple blood sweep on stage, they would mimic every action down to like when you were taking a breath to pause and catch your breath if you did like a 100-meter sprint trauma lane. They were absolutely understood the gravity of what they were learning could potentially be used at any point in the future.
Yeah. And, again, during this time, this is a photo of just us kind of hanging out after on a Friday night. We'd been training for a bit. We had absolutely wonderful translators. Those two on the park bench in front of us are translators. We can't do this without them. And again, it should really be emphasized that we can leave when we want to, and they can't, and that makes a massive difference. But we do have some fun. You kind of have to. We were under nightly missile and drone attack. So we had our bunker, and we decided that was much more of a club than we were ever going to get into anywhere else. So we made our own club.
Spent many nights sleeping in there just because the missile attacks were so frequent. It just made more sense to stay down there.
And just general information availability was sometimes ambiguous. But it is really important to note that these are numbers that were updated yesterday. There is no difference of who a target is over there. It is anyone and everyone, and that I cannot emphasize that enough, that in this conflict, it does not matter whether you are marked as a medical provider or not, you will be attacked. This is us during an attack. We didn't have the ability to get to a bunker quickly, so we're just doing the best that we can.
This was my apartment in Mariupol. Within 24 hours of when the invasion started, one of our colleagues who was still in Ukraine while we were told to leave sent us this picture where we used to gather to have dinner during the week, and that entire block is now gone. If you look at the updated photos on Google Maps or the war images, it's very quickly leveled that entire neighborhood.
Yep, my apartment in Kramatorsk suffered the same fate about 3 months in. We would spend a lot of time in hallways, mostly at night. yeah, we spent a lot of time in stairwells. Yeah, it's just kind of the reality of it. And again, you know, the reality is that, yeah, there are a lot of medical providers going over there and stuff. But even, you know, Pete Reed, who was a WEM speaker, was killed this year. And he was a good friend. And we're trying to do work, but, you know, we are actively being targeted at all times.
And with the work we've been doing, not just with Medics for Ukraine, but other organizations, we've had the opportunity to meet so many people. One of our colleagues in the orange, he was working with his own organization to deliver convoys of supplies, as I mentioned earlier, proper clothing, shelter materials, helping people move from one city to another back to a safer area. And some of these organizations, they don't have medics on their staff. They don't have medical training. And the other gentleman in the photo who's showing how to perform a needle decompression on me, we just happened to be crossing paths. He was a fellow instructor, a fellow medic. And anytime some of these organizations ran into us and we actually vetted each other and got to know each other, they're so hungry for whatever else they can do to help, because he's in this is shortly before he went down to Kherson after the flooding when the dam was broken. He's like, I'm going to encounter people who are sick and injured. What can we do to help? We didn't have time to give him a full proper BTLS course, but you know, he was curious, like, when are you guys talking about a decompression? What is that? What's a pneumothorax? And you know, just any chance you can give, whether it's a foreign national providing aid or Ukrainians, because there were so many local drivers and translators that were just like, I know at some point I may be called upon to act and I don't want to be unprepared. How can I help? What kind of knowledge can you give me? And the unfortunate reality is that, you know, just because, as David said, you're a medic and an instructor, Oscar's no longer with us. He was killed last month in a rear area teaching a course.
And this other volunteer is also no longer working due to injuries sustained. This is usually what it looks like before we're training. Sean's on his phone doing all the logistics. I'm mostly there taking photos and trying to get out of his way. Yeah.
Yeah, organization is a force multiplier. So if you're looking at different organizations, and not to be redundant, and how they're going to do their job, if you're looking for opportunities, you know, have that task, purpose, end state. What does their bureaucratic and logistics infrastructure look like to understand what you're getting into? And so it's just a constant acting on that information to set up things. So at this point in this photo, I'm looking at the schedule of what we're going to teach tomorrow after talking to Mark, Luca, and Sean of what do these students that we're going to be teaching, what do they need, what do they want, and how can we even adjust our lesson plan for their mission profiles, because they're expecting to see certain things in certain situations. So do we have the time to build and construct scenarios for them that are going to be purpose-built for something that they may encounter?
And part of that is sometimes you do have to improvise your own stuff. It was really nice that you know, Medics for Ukraine does have these really wonderful trauma kits that we get to use to train on, but you know, it's really hard to find those really nice high-fidelity simulation mannequins, especially for wound packing and things like that. So we've become not too bad at finding appropriate material that kind of mimics some muscular structure and actually gives you the resistance needed. And if we can't find it or make it, we do try to bring it. Those two bags in the very back, those two backpacks, those were our kit, and all of the rest of this is stuff that we hauled in as training supplies for the summer. During the training, again, the particular unit that we trained for, we're not going to talk about very much, but they were excellent students. We were the last module of their pre-deployment workup, so the majority of them were immediately going to be in a combat situation within about a week or so after we gave this. We were kind of their last stop. I can't emphasize enough high-fidelity training, training in a realistic conditions. A lot of times we talk about, you know, as you can see, like we have an injured person here on the left, and they're still holding security. In these types of dynamic environments, just because you're injured doesn't mean that the fighting is over. Usually it means that the fighting is just starting. And again, we were trying to train them as much as we possibly could to introduce stress in a manner which is, we don't introduce stress just to make it stressful. You have to introduce realistic stress. What are the conditions that you're actually going to find yourself in? Because just operating under stress doesn't actually do much for you, but operating in the environment that may be stressful, that is a key part of training. And so we would never do stressful things for kind of contrivance's sake.
Yeah, what you're trying to do is introduce and induce a state of eustress and not distress. You want to be able the student to still feel like they have function and control, because once you push them to the point where they no longer have control, they're no longer learning. They're spiraling, they're forgetting their lessons. So you get them to the point of, yes, this is real, yes, this is dramatic, but you want them to still be able to demonstrate what you've been trying to teach them during the day before they got to that scenario.
Yeah. We did get a really wonderful message back, which was really great. It's really nice that you do get to hear feedback like this. We got this about 2 days later. It's a kind of a generic, thanks for coming to the training. The next text message, though, that we got was about 3 weeks later.
And what's interesting about this is, as a paramedic and instructor, if you're a senior provider at a hospital, you train a junior, they may come back to you at some point in their career and say, hey, I remember when you were grilling me about this particular presentation. Well, I saw it last week and I remembered that, and it allowed us to have a positive outcome. Or you're working on the ambulance service and the supervisor will pull you in and say, hey, that resuscitation you ran the other day, hey, just wanted to give you kudos because they were discharged with a good neurological outcome. But when you get a message like this from students and throughout the training knowing they're going to be using these skills to save a life, it's far more surreal, because the students in those pictures, those are people that are mentioned in this message. So knowing that they use that training on each other to save a life and come back from where they were, it hits you far differently than you would expect.
This was one of the coolest messages I think I've ever gotten in my career so far.
And over the 2 years the Medics4Ukraine has been operating, we actually have received several of these, and it just, for me, for Mark, for us, it just makes us feel that we're actually making a difference, that we don't have necessarily to be there front line, and we can spread, by training a few people, we're actually spreading that knowledge, and we are multiplying our effects and our good. We got several of these. We feel like we saved a lot of lives just by default, and it makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Makes us feel very good.
And I think the important message that's coming across is, we're not an aid agency, we're not an NGO, we're not financed by the government, or, we just, like you guys decided to do something, and it has real and marked impact. But we could have decided not to, and that text would have never arrived, the outcome would have been different in that particular incident. So I think it's, it's the power of us and the power to decide to be positive and to do something rather than relying on other people to do it for you.
Yeah. I do sometimes feel like this typifies the experience of working in conflict zones.
Move on.
We were in a restaurant one day, and somebody went to the bathroom and came back, and they had this weird look on their face. And, all right, just don't ask. And then one of us went to the bathroom. I saw this and came back, and we were like, did you guys see? Everybody's like, yeah. Okay, cool. Anyways, after this, I'd like to open it up to discussions from anybody who is here, online, and again, we're here to answer your questions, whatever those
Just before the question, I'd like to say thank you both for having been here today. And it's important to also know that obviously, through Medics4Ukraine, these guys have basically, we all donating our time. They're going out there, they're risking their lives to help. That is on a voluntary basis. No one at Medics4Ukraine gets paid. To be fair, World District Medicine and Mark finance all the logistics, so every donation that we actually got, 100% of it has gone on to medical kit to be able to maximize the, obviously, the effort. So thank you, guys.
And one thing to mention, there's a lot of photographs with camouflage and weapons, and you don't go there as expected to be a combatant, but within the Ukrainian theater, as I mentioned, the Ministry of Health falling underneath the Ministry of Defense and everything going on, it's really difficult as a humanitarian where you want to maintain that neutrality, but understanding that the other side, there's a side that does not care. There's a side that sees you as a target of opportunity. And especially last year, it was very hard for a lot of us in that dimension to struggle with that, of being considered actively aiding and abetting one side, despite the fact that you're open to treating any human being that comes before you that needs aid. And there's something that, the reality is when you go there to deliver that aid, whether you are going to be training alongside a military unit or your fellow EMS healthcare hospital providers, the inevitability is that you may find yourself, or they may find themselves in that situation where they're actively engaged in the conflict.
So what questions do you guys have?
So in supporting your efforts, what specific needs or resources would you find most crucial, and how can individuals or communities or other groups effectively contribute to your mission? Is it just money? Is it supplies?
So I'm going to answer this one, then we can, yeah. So money is always obviously up on the top of the list, just because with the money you can target, we get a list of exactly what they want. I mean, it's always the same things. It's always been the same things since day one. From 1, 2, 3, 4, it's always tourniquets, hemostatics products, pelvic binders, needles for the compressions, blah blah blah. So that's always up. Ambulances. Is always up there. 95% of patient transfers from the front lines are done on battered trucks, vans, ambulances, and because of the roads, because of what's going on, they last a couple of days, they just get destroyed quite often. So money is always up there, yes, and we can then funnel it to exactly what it's needed. However, we have not raised £3 million. What we have delivered is £3 million worth of medical aid that's been donated from all across the UK, but we actually got stuff from the US, we got stuff from Denmark, from Norway, Holland, Italy. So we actually have been a recipient of quite a lot of kit donation that we transport where it is most needed in Ukraine. So we just take anything. That's not true. Lately, there has been quite a lot of push to try to give us quite a lot of PPE from the COVID masks and gowns and so on, which initially were useful, but at the moment they're just saying no, we don't need it anymore. No, please, we just got like thousands and thousands of these. We don't need that. What we need is the tourniquets, is the hemostatic agents. That's what they want.
I think what's been a benefit, being relatively small and doing this in our kind of free time, is being really tight on mission. So being really, really flexible at first to define it, because we expected to go and support, as we had in Syria, sort of pediatric operations. And quite quickly, as Lucas said, we realized that wasn't really the need. So we focused on trauma and the medical community, whether that was in uniform or out of uniform. And then just staying true to that mission. So and it makes it quite easy then, when something extraneous comes in, or a suggestion, or can we give you this, comes in, and it doesn't fit with the mission, which we keep really tight, then we just say no, because that's just very generous, but it just distracts us and serves to dilute us. But also because we're then delivering that to people who don't really need it, we're actually just cluttering their supply lineup. So being really tight and really refined with mission, and having that as a little bit of a mantra, stay on mission, stay on mission, stay on mission, is really, really helpful. And we didn't decide that right at the beginning, but that's what became clear. And then we just have reiterated that to ourselves as we've gone through, and when distractions have been thrown in our way.
And it's a very weird war, if you like. It's a new way of fighting. There will be books written about this war for years to come. And so you do have an active country that many in the East sees the war, but then the whole country is at war because of missile strikes and so on. But it's also a country that is trying to live a life. People go to work, shops are open. So they're also looking at rebuilding already, even though the war is not over and no one knows when it's going to finish. The World Health Organization has been doing amazing work with rehabilitation centers, for example. We help a couple of NGOs that are now operating in the center and east of the country with physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and just work on the rehabilitation side of things, which is fantastic. They're doing a fantastic job. And we're already talking, obviously, about the mental health side of things. We've been talking about it for quite a few months, but it's going to be a nation that is got PTSD, the whole nation, and it's how can we support that transition from now, not from when the war is over. How can we actually support the mental health of the population somehow? Which is because it's definitely not up into their problems at the moment.
The other question I have is, are you teaching and or providing early antibiotics in these injured people?
Yeah, so we are teaching to the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Guidelines. Our instructor materials are from the Defense Health Agency, the official translations in Ukrainian whenever possible. And part of Tactical Combat Casualty Care is early antibiotic administration for severe injuries, ertapenem, ceftriaxone. Ceftriaxone is the most popular medicine I've seen when I've been far forward at the hospitals. It's everywhere, cases and cases of it.
And there's huge demand, and we've been providing it, we've been buying some, but it's because of obviously money. Again, it's always like, it's every single day or every single week, or when we organize a convoy, it's like, I've got this spot, what am I prioritizing? Yeah. And it makes it really difficult. It's actually a very hard choice every single time.
There's a question at the front here somewhere. Yeah.
Thanks very much, guys. What you guys are doing is absolutely amazing. It really is. I have so many questions, but I'm going to restrict it just to a couple, if that's okay. Firstly, how do you guys stay safe? Because if you guys don't stay safe, the mission fails. And secondly, the mission as it occurs now must have changed over time, to Mark's point. What are you doing to keep on top of mission change and ensuring coordination with other people who are going into the area?
So I think one of the biggest helpful things, and I think it comes with experience, is not having what we would call, at least in the US, mission creep, which is, you came in to do ABC, and then you see that DEF needs to be done, and so you're like, oh, I'll start doing DEF, and then all of a sudden you are distributing resources that could have gone specifically to one thing, and now that's not getting met because you're trying to do these other things. So unfortunately, you do at times need to have a little bit of blinders and say, nope, this is exactly what we're going to be doing, and kind of stick to that. When it comes to staying safe, so Sean and I have a cumulative 25 years working in conflict and disaster zones. We've both been through some fairly advanced trainings, and that's the best thing that you can do, is to get trained. We take a lot of precautions in very small ways. So the manner in which we'd get SIM cards. So a month prior to us arriving in country, our fixers were getting non-sequential SIM cards at a variety of different places. And those SIM cards would be replaced at a relatively brisk rate. Simple kind of things like that, which are easy to implement, but not necessarily easy to know to implement. And so that's just kind of what the training does, is what are the small things that you can do, and then just having the kind of discipline to do that. If it's easy, it's probably not operationally secure.
One of the things, your mobile is your biggest security risk. So it's worth remembering that if your phone is tagged in some of these places, if you go to a completely different country that might have sympathies, they tag your phone there too. So not taking your UK mobile in is the best option, and getting a local SIM. But your phone can be tracked around the world, and so if you become a person of interest to them, the fact that your phone is now active somewhere else is actually still makes you, they still know where you are, essentially. So,
and I think it's important to be honest as well. You're going into a war zone. Is inherent, I can't even say it, inherently dangerous, and that element of danger can be mitigated, cannot be eliminated. And so, you know, we from me sitting back at the moment, I've not been for a few months. You know, we create a risk assessment each time. We speak to various organizations. We are lucky. We're supported by a couple of intelligence agencies. We get all the information we can get, and we know and we trust our partners in Ukraine. The Ukrainians, they live it every single day. However, the whole country can be missiled. You know, so there is an acceptance, and what are you comfortable to accept? Now, because these guys have been done it for 25 years, probably their risk appetite is higher, just because you do get used to that as well, which is not necessarily a good thing. But you get used to risk, and it's like, oh, well, how much can I push that? And I'm finding that by actually doing the risk assessments and staying back, my risk appetite is lower, and I feel that that's a good thing. If it doesn't feel right, I just don't give ahead. And it's very hard to explain what feels right and what doesn't. But by having been out there and understanding what these guys are going into, I'm like, no, that doesn't feel right. I don't care if you're going to go, you're not going. I don't know if that explains.
I think we'll do, I mean, given that when we did the anti-surveillance course, I kind of put that on, and Peter agreed to come out. He has quite an eclectic background, thinking, well, maybe 5 people will be interested in this. The fact there was almost 50 people there was a bit of a shock to all of us. So I think next year what we'll do some more specific training about keeping comms safe and that type of stuff in a workshop environment, to give you guys some sort of top-level tools to, because it's not just Ukraine, it's lots of other places where you need to keep these considerations in mind, especially with the types of careers that you people either have or are likely to have.
The photo of, that showed us kind of hanging out in those twin beds was a really great hotel with this really, really big, wonderful vista of one of the most highly targeted parts of the city, which is lovely. And so when we got there, you know, we actively had a 15, 20-minute discussion sitting in this room of, all right, so if a missile or a drone detonates enough to break the windows, and the window is going to, no matter what, cascade onto the bed, we're going to have our feet towards the window, and we're going to do that because we can tourniquet our lower limbs, we cannot tourniquet our head. If we're going to be needing to tourniquet our head, where does our tourniquets live? Okay, both of our tourniquets, which we keep on us at all times, are going to be here. Okay, where is the trauma kit? The trauma kit is going to be here. I can feel this with my left hand, he can feel it with his right hand. So, I mean, it is a methodical checklist, and it is, you know, and then we war game it for another 10 minutes.
And remember, you know, a car bomber will come to the front of a hotel. Car bomb goes up 3 floors. Fire engine ladders only go up 7 floors. So you want to be at the back of the building between floor 3 and 7. So it's just getting some common sense, sort of simple things that actually increase your chances of, well, mitigate, not increase necessarily chances of survival, but mitigate the risk.
And even like the hotels that I would try to choose, if I would be working solo, you know, if it's again right around that 3-story mark with an interior courtyard, so no direct strike on the exterior of the building is going to be able to push all the way through. You know, it's just a constant issue of, can I increase my survival chance by just 1 or 2%?
And in few places, we actually had the training team sleeping in bunkers and training in bunkers.
We slept in bunkers a lot.
So it has to be fluid. It has to be whatever
and artillery shadows. Whoever thought artillery shadows would be an interesting thing? Artillery came from one direction. If you're in front of a tall building that's facing towards the artillery, you're in the artillery shadow. So walk in the shadow of those buildings facing towards where the gunfire is coming from.
Yep. Yeah. And some of these things, the UN has a course online, Basic Security in the Field. I think it might still be 2.0. There's a WHO online course as well. Many of your more reputable organizations will require you to at least do those as the minimum before you can deploy with them, just so you can like start getting introduction. There's a lot of free online education at that baseline level of what to expect, if not just Ukraine, but other disaster, conflict zones, or resource poor areas where you may encounter security risks.
Did that answer your question, Mike? That was the longest answer in the world.
That was a great question. You know, I feel like a lot of times people think, oh yeah, we just go. Oh, no,
we saw that a lot.
You do see it a lot, and you definitely, and I think that's the other thing that at least Sean and I like to emphasize is, you know, Ukraine is not the place to learn how to do this.
And I think it's that thing I sent it, it's the thing that informed that statement when I did my opening speech, is examining your own motivations to make sure they're the right motivations. because you can get caught up in the excitement of it. So you need to constantly re-examine why you're doing it.
I think that's it. That's it. No more questions.
I have a question. Have you found support? Has it varied now as the Ukraine conflict has dropped somewhat out of media spotlight?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So if any of you is involved in the area, you will know that it's sort of tailing down. It's all got to do with the media. The whole attention is obviously focused on another conflict that is raging, and that's how it should be. But there are several conflicts going on all around the world. So yes, there is less attention, there is less donations, even in material kit, not necessarily just money, and that's just what it is. So we are, I can only speak for Medics4Ukraine. We'll just keep doing what we're doing. We have ramped up what we're doing. We got, as I said, a convoy has gone in the country yesterday. We have a team that's going to deploy in 10 days, and that's going to bring us to about 1,000 people trained in combat casualty care. I don't know if it answers your question, but for us, we keep going. But yes, there has been a tail off.
And the delivery of the hemostatic agent was sponsored by the Tolkien Foundation, so Lord of the Rings. So we appreciate their support.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for excellent presentation. The Ukrainians have been fighting Russians and their proxies now since 2014 in one way or another, although obviously only more recently at this much greater scale. Have we got a sense of the sort of lessons they've been learning and that we've been picking up from them as a result of this?
Yeah, so initially getting in last year and working far forward to assist their hospitals, one of the unique things is last year the Ministry of Health asked for foreign healthcare volunteers, and that's how several of us started our inlays in addition to the previous connections. And you get there and their anesthesiologists, traumatologists are fantastically well educated, but that level of tactical medical thinking and that lack of pre-hospital network was very much non-existent, but it was like hard-won experience. And coming back this year to teach more TCCC and everything, we see that there's a lot of lessons to be learned even on our end from how they've managed to adapt. TCCC has been taught from a war in the Middle East perspective, from an anti-terrorism perspective, and they're dealing with a lot of blast injuries, explosives, vehicles, trench warfare style stuff. And so we have a lot we can learn from them as they, through hard-won experience, brought these back, and how we can update our curriculum to provide better care in other situations as well.
Yeah, I think updating, I had a great question that was asked is TCCC still relevant? And I think it is. Personally, I think that we usually see kind of tactical combat casualty care as an addendum to previous medical knowledge, whereas in that environment it should be the baseline, and then you can attach more specialized knowledge on top of it. But there are going to be hundreds of papers already. Hundreds of papers have been written, and so I think that the biggest thing that as a medical provider you can do is to not get caught up in a dogmatic approach to education. And just because I learned something last year does not mean that it is not already out of date. And be willing to recognize that I could be right last year, and now I can be completely wrong.
And I guess the most specific lesson learned, to give you a very concrete example, we don't have air assets in Ukraine that can just go in and pick up someone from a hospital, and you have your dust-off units that are just going to pick someone up and take them to a Role 3 or repatriate them in a Role 4. It's all by ground. It's all prolonged casualty care, whether it's at that far forward Role 1 or en route casualty care over potentially some very bumpy, bombed-out roads, and understanding how to work with that is, from a Western perspective, it's not something that we are as familiar as we should be given the lessons we learned out of this conflict and potential changes in theaters going forward. Or if you're doing disaster medicine in other areas, you may find yourself in similar prolonged casualty care or prolonged extrication phase of care. That those lessons can be applied to many theaters around the world and many different humanitarian projects as well.
And the time frame that we're managing patients, it used to be like, oh my God, we're going to have this patient for like 18 hours was just nuts. And now it's more like, yeah, cool, we're going to have them for 72 hours and not at a Role 2 and maybe not even at a Role 1, but at a combat casualty collection point. And so kind of the blurring of our traditional kind of NATO Role 1 through 4, those columnized rows of what is expected to be at each of those has needed to be adjusted. And so, yeah.
Thank you for the great questions, and thank you, because it was a busy night last night, so thank you for your continued energy and the kind of survivors party that we have gathered here.
What a great team. Let's give a round of applause to Mark and Luca.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. We have a break now from 11 to 11:30, coffee break, and that brings the first morning session to a close. I think some of the overarching themes we can all take away is these are people who decided to make a difference, and we can all do that, and we can just step up and be little flames that challenge the darkness around us. So I think that's something to take away, and it's been a pleasure to host the guys this morning. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the coffee.